Welcome to Dating Yapps, the podcast where we swap wild dating stories, share laughs, and serve up real talk experiences and advice. So let's get into it. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Dating Yapps. I'm your host, Alex Daly. I'm so excited to dive into this journey with you all, and I wanted to share a little bit of background about why this podcast exists. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own personal dating journey, the things that I learned along the way, and my vision for this podcast. I'm just a regular person. I've been on my fair share of dates, and I've definitely made my fair share of mistakes along the way, but I've also gotten a few good stories out of it. And I want to share those stories because I am a firm believer that dating can be fun. And I believe that we can all connect over our shared experiences in dating and relationships. I've been through highs and lows of dating. I've learned a lot. A lot of silly stories have come out of it. A lot of awkward stories, some low points, some high points, you name it. I've probably been through it. And now I want to share those stories with all of you alongside all of your stories. But before we get to your stories, I want to share a little bit of mine. A few years ago, my life changed when I decided to end my marriage. I had been in my marriage for almost 7 years, but I had been in that relationship for even longer. It was probably closer to 11 years at that point. And so this was a really hard decision for me to come to. I just was at a point in my life where I felt like I had outgrown my relationship. And this was a really tough realization to come to. I had met my ex. We started dating when we were both in our mid-20s. And I think when you meet someone in your 20s and you don't really know who you are, the chances of you growing with that person versus growing apart from each other, it's just kind of more likely that you're going to grow apart. And unfortunately, that is what happened to us. And it was a really tough realization to come to. I lived with my ex for a very long time. We had become good friends, and I still think our friendship was one of the strongest parts of our relationship. It was a tough call. I had to talk to friends and family about it when I finally realized how I was feeling, and I started therapy in this process, which really helped give me the confidence to make the decision to ultimately move on. I thought about it for many months because I just wasn't sure. I didn't know if I wanted to make that big change in my life. I lived with this person. Our lives were very intertwined, but there was just this feeling for me that there was something else out there for me, that I was meant to be somewhere else, that I really felt like I needed to be on my own in order to figure out who I was and to become the person that I wanted to be. Unfortunately, I felt like I did have to end my relationship in order to do that. And it was tough. I will say it was probably one of the hardest things that I ever did because I did care about my ex, and I honestly still do. I would love to talk about my decision to end my marriage later on in this podcast, but for now, I'll just say that we ended things very amicably, and I am super, super grateful for that. I still have a good relationship with my ex, and I'd love to keep it that way. I know I'm very lucky in this regard. I know not everybody gets to end their long-term marriages in an amicable way, so I'm grateful that we were able to do that and be kind to each other throughout the process. I had a close family friend say to me during this time where I was contemplating separating, she said, sometimes I think in your 20s, you need someone who's going to step out into the world with you. And I think that my ex and I definitely were that for each other. We needed that support at the time. That relationship was serving us at the time. And then unfortunately, we just got to a point where it wasn't serving either one of us. We were both being a little bit held back in our growth. So ultimately made the decision to separate and moved out on my own. When I made that decision, I moved to a new city. I started my life almost completely over. I'm really grateful that I was able to do that I had the opportunity and privilege to. And when I got to a new city, I was kind of ready to put myself out there back into the dating world. And I will say I was able to do that probably because I had spent a lot of time thinking about the end of my relationship, the end of my marriage. I probably grieved that relationship while I was still in it. And I'm not going to say that was the right thing to do. I'm not going to condone it or recommend it, but I do think that it is something that happens often and that we don't talk about is that we are grieving the relationship while we're still in it. So that is what happened to me. Once I was out on my own for a little while, I felt like I had processed my breakup almost while I was doing it, which is wild to say, but that is what it felt like. And so I was pretty ready to get myself out there. Once I landed in this new city, I was kind of excited. I had made a big change and I honestly was ready to go for it. So that's what I did. This was my first time getting on the dating apps. I had never been on them before in my 20s. I met my ex probably right before or right around the time that dating apps were becoming more popular and it just wasn't a thing when I had been dating in the past. So getting on the apps as a person who had just ended their relationship in as a person in my mid to late 30s, like it was a big learning curve. Let me tell you, I had to learn the hard way, honestly. I didn't know how to make a profile. I probably, used all the wrong pictures. I gave generic, boring answers to the prompts before I figured out how to really make my profile more efficient, how to attract in the sort of person that I would want to attract in. But I made all the mistakes along the way. I didn't know how to message people back. I was afraid to message people first. I probably stayed in conversation on the apps longer than I should have when there wasn't really a connection there to begin with. So I did make a lot of mistakes, but I felt like I did actually pick it up fairly quickly. And I started having fun kind of right away once I started dating. And this was because I sort of used dating as an opportunity to learn about myself more than anything else. I mean, I had known that in the past, I had been very concerned about whether or not the person sitting across from me was going to like me. And that was my main concern. So I was answering questions how I thought someone would want me to answer them versus what my answer was for myself because I was so afraid. I wanted everyone to like me, but I didn't realize until later in life that sometimes people are not going to like you and that's okay. They're not for you. So I used this dating opportunity as an opportunity to learn about myself. And I started just assuming that the other person was going to like me. Maybe that's a cocky way to think, but my goal was to focus on whether or not I liked them and whether or not I felt a connection with them, whether or not we felt good energy together. And so I use this as an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to break my own patterns from the past. It's really interesting to observe your own patterns in dating and to figure out what is and what is not working for you. So I did that almost as an experiment as I was going on these dates. And to be honest, I used dating as an opportunity to get to know my new city. Like I was somewhere new. I didn't know very much. I didn't know the cool spots to go. And so I was like, hey, I'm new in town. What's good? That really helped me get in a positive mindset about dating because I knew that I was going to learn something and get something out of any date, whether or not we had a connection. So I would say yes to dates. I would be excited to go on them because I'm like, okay, even if this person is not for me, maybe I will go to a new restaurant. Maybe I will visit a neighborhood that I haven't been to yet. Maybe this person will tell me about a cool local band that I hadn't otherwise heard of. So I was always learning something, getting something out of every single date, whether it was learning about myself, the city, my preferences. And that is really how I had a lot of fun in dating. And I will say, I was in a privileged place already because I had just ended my marriage, come out of this very long-term relationship, and I knew I wasn't looking to get into something serious right away again. And I will say this is the most fun time to date. I would highly recommend if you don't have an outcome in mind and you're sort of just dating for fun, dating to learn, dating to get out there, this is the best time because you can have the most fun. You're not expecting to get anything out of it other than fun, learning, whatever, meeting new people. It's the best. Highly recommend dating with no outcome in mind. You can just have a lot of fun. Definitely made some mistakes along the way, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we are all out here figuring it out. No one has it figured out. No one has it perfect. Everyone's feeling a little bit nervous on dates, and that's okay. So this is just really how I started my dating journey. I was in a new city, putting myself out there. And it was also during this time, I was not only going on dates, but I was going to events because I was really trying to put myself out there to meet people and make friends too. So I was going to events, going on walks, taking classes. And I started to notice that some of the best conversations I had were around dating. It was just a really fast way for people to connect. We had stories to share, the good, the bad, some, very silly things along the way, maybe an inappropriate message on an app. It was a quick way to connect with people because it was like, hey, we are all going through this. We are all having these similar experiences, and we are able to connect and laugh and feel like we were not in it alone. So I just realized that there's so much power in connecting over these shared experiences. It helps you feel less alone. It reminds you we're in this dating world together. And it was also around this time that I started sharing some of my sillier dating stories to my close friends on my Instagram stories. So this was a way to connect. I was new to the dating world. I was just out and about there, and I had a lot of friends who wanted to hear about what I was doing. So I would bring my sillier stories to Instagram. I would sometimes poll people about whether or not they had similar experiences. I would ask for advice. And it was funny because we had all experienced similar things. So a lot of times my friends were able to advise me or say, oh my God, something similar happened. It was so silly. And it was just a fun way to connect. That's really where I got the idea for starting this podcast. I wanted to take those candid stories, the funny stories, the silly stories, and these really personal conversations I've had with my friends and take them to a wider audience. And I really do want this to be bigger than just sharing some silly stories. Yes, I do want the silly stories. We want to have fun. We want to be silly. We want to talk about the weird things. We want to know we're not alone. But I think that is the most important thing, is that we're sharing these experiences knowing that we're not alone. I want to share heartfelt stories, sad stories, the breakup stories, the get back together stories, the learn about yourself and become your highest self stories. And I want everyone to see that we actually have so much in common and use these stories as a way to come together and bond and have a shared space for laughs, maybe some advice, definitely some little embarrassing moments. But I really want this podcast to be a place for connection. I'm really excited for this podcast. I'm so excited. Thank you for joining me here for this first episode of Dating Yapps. I cannot wait to keep sharing, keep laughing, keep yapping with all of you. And I also want to hear from you. So if you have a dating story that you would like to share, slide into my DMs on Instagram. I am at dating.yapps. That's yaps with 2 P's, just like the apps. Or you can email me at datingyapspodcast@gmail.com. And please, please share this podcast with a friend, especially that one who always has the wildest dating stories. Send them my way too. And I am so excited to continue this journey with you all. I hope you will stay tuned for more laughs, more stories, more yapping. And until next time, I will talk to you later, friends.